Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love, hosted by Richard Osler. Sometimes I reach out to somebody and ask them to be on the podcast, and sometimes it's somebody whose story we'd never hear. And that's my guest today, my friend Nigel Bull. Joining us from London, England. Welcome to the podcast, Nigel.
Thank you, Richard. It's a pleasure to be here.
And I love hearing your English accent, Nigel. As listeners may know, I served my mission in Manchester and Liverpool, north of you, and love the people in England. Nigel, when I became an ally, we traded messages, and I looked back at all the messages we traded, and we had the chance to meet at Affirmation in 2018 or 2019. Nigel made it all the way out here. Nigel's in a wheelchair. He's been in a wheelchair since his late 20s. He's in his 60s. He's gay, but he currently identifies as asexual. He's been around the LDS church. He's not active in the church right now. He actually left the church completely a couple of years ago. His names are still on the records of the church. But he got baptized at age 16 and rebaptized at age 40. And like a lot of wonderful people around our faith, are trying to navigate how to be a Latter-day Saint and how to be gay. And I just felt impressed. Nigel doesn't have a platform. He doesn't have his own podcast. And I just felt impressed to use this platform. So Nigel's story will be forever recorded for anybody that wants to hear it. So Nigel, you're really brave to do this. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you. I'm sure there won't be any members of the church in Britain that will be listening to this, or any straight members anyway.
Good. Tell us about, you joined the church at age 16, is that right? Tell us, so you're a convert?
I need to go back a couple of years before I tell you that.
Okay, it's yours. You go. You start wherever you want to start, Nigel.
When I was 13, I went to boarding school. And as somebody who was 13, I was starting to see what my sexuality was. Boarding school was 1/3 girls, 2/3 boys, because it was a speech impairment school. And most of the people with speech impairments are male. So they had a theory, if we keep the genders apart, it would help the sex in the school. Unfortunately, it didn't quite work. I had lots of sex in boarding school with lots of boys. I hope this doesn't shock any of you listeners, but I was a boy myself, remember. And I came home and I was at, because boarding school holidays and the holidays on the Isle of Wight was different. I lost all my friends on the Isle of Wight. So I was lonely and I was invited to go to Mitro by a young man knocking on my door. And I went to Mitro. And this later on got me to, I met the missionaries. And one of the missionaries I fancied like mad. So I joined the church because I really fancied the missionaries. And they didn't teach me about the law of chastity. And after I was baptized, Richard, can you remember that book that Young Men Only?
Yeah, I don't remember it exactly, but yeah, I've heard of it.
they give me the booklet, Young Men Only. What talk about a factory and how wrong it is to play with your factory and how evil homosexuality is. And I went to the missionaries and went, I'm gay. And the missionaries went, panic. Not a problem. It's the bishop's problem now. Now you remember it's the bishop's problem. Go to the bishop. Oh, I forgot to say, when I was in my temple recommend, on my baptism recommend interview, in my baptism interview, I wasn't asked about about the Lord of Chastity neither. So I did not know anything about the law of chastity before I was baptized. And so the first time I shouldn't have been really baptized because I wasn't worthy. I didn't go through the stages. I didn't get interviewed by the mission president or anything like that, like you meant to be, I believe. I I did 1.5 years of seminary, which was um, the first thing I knew about Joseph Smith is what he was shot. And the seminary teacher looked at me and went, any questions, Nigel? And I went, who's Joseph Smith? Which was quite scary for her. But going on, my disabilities are I've got cerebral palsy, I'm autistic, have autism, I said that, epilepsy, what does come into the story a little bit later on. So there was me, a new baptized member of the church, trying to get a testimony, trying to be the best woman I could be. And for the age of 16 to 17, I would have a worthiness interviews every other week. And usually, if you baptize at 16, you get to become a priest straight away. But they thought it was better for me to go up the ramps. So I slowly got the priesthood. And I was slowly, I said at one time I was so far in the closet that I lived on Turkish delights. That's when that sorry Richard, my brain gone blank. Can you ask me a question?
Just a comment. Listeners, I'm hearing a lot of this. I'm hearing this for the first time. I just thank you for Nigel for talking about boarding school and what went on at boarding school. And sometimes that's a little uncomfortable for us, but it's the reality of your life. So I've learned to sort of sit with that and recognize it takes courage to talk about that. I'm glad you joined the church. Sounds like we didn't tell you everything about the church before you got baptized. And so sometimes these podcasts help us to do better. And that's part of, hearing Nigel's story is how can we better support people joining our church, and especially people that are gay. I reckon, I think it's really courageous of you to join the church and feel some connection here. It sounds like you're at the same time I'm starting to deal with health issues. I think you said autism. You may have said cerebral palsy. And that's, so you're walking a complicated road. You're trying to make a new religion work. You're working through your sexuality, and you're also battling health issues. So my heart kind of gets bigger for you as I hear your story. And you don't have a family, you don't have parents sort of guiding you like a lot of 16-year-olds are, at least LDS parents. And so you're kind of walking this road along. So just keep telling your story. You could talk about your 20s, your 30s. I know at some point you separated yourself from the church, and I think at 40 you came back. So you could just kind of pick up the story wherever you want to.
Right. At 18, I decided I really, really wanted to serve a mission. I think partly because I was promised if I served a mission, I would become straight. It wasn't common knowledge. Hardly anybody knew in the world at the time. And I did my best to serve a mission. And because of my health issues, I was told there was no way that I could serve a mission. Then one mission president said, occasionally, Nigel, we got an odd number of elders in the world, in the mission, I mean. And at that time, would you be willing to serve as a temporary missionary? And I said, yes, of course. I would love to do that. And I read on quite a few, from a fortnight to 3 weeks, serving with the missionaries at a full-time missionary, usually in my own world. So I had my own callings to do besides that. So it's, sometimes on Sunday, we had to find another member to be with my companion because I was in teaching Sunday school because that was my calling at the time.
That's cool.
Can't remember where I ever got the time to do prepare Sunday school lessons. And because my parents were non-members, we had permission to go to a dinner appointment at my parents every week with the mission president. And the one rule I had was none of the missionaries complained. Was halfway through a day, I went home for hours sleep. So I didn't get too tired. Because missionary days are long days. That's it until my last two companions changed things completely in my life. The first one didn't want to be on a mission, was on a mission because he was promised a brand new car if he served the mission. Didn't believe in the church, didn't like the church, and didn't want to do any work. One morning, I woken up on P-Day and said, Elder, we need to do studying. He looked at me and went, Nigel, it's P-Day. I said, yes, but P-Day don't start until after study. And he got up, picked me off my feet, and put me on the wall and said, Nigel, I'm going to back to bed. You mind your own bloody piss business. And I went, I don't want to be here. You scare me, Elder. I don't want to be here. At the time, the zone leaders were living just down the street from me. So, no, the district leaders were living down the street from me, I mean. So I went and knocked on their door. They went, where's your companion, Nigel? I went, in bed. And they said, you look scared. I went, I am. I went in. And the zone leaders was there. And they went, right, Nigel, we need to get in touch with the mission president. You stay here, one of us will go back to your flat and keep an eye on your companion. I stayed there for about 2 hours. And by the time I got home to our flat, my companion was told that he was being transferred to another area. That before he was being transferred, he was going to have a meeting with the mission president. I bumped into him years and years after his mission, and he said that was the best thing that ever happened to him because he had to get the testimony, and he did.
Wow.
So, how many people do you know who can say they helped to convert their companion?
That's pretty cool, Nigel.
A couple of years before that, this was in the 80s. I was in, we would have a district meeting in my flat. And the Zoom leaders was over. And we were talking about, and the Zoom leaders started to talk about this brand new cancer that was going around the surgeries that only affects gay men. I don't know why they was talking about it, but they was. And that's the first time I ever heard about HIV or AIDS. It became, and later on, just after that mission, I realized that if I had really a choice in my life, and the choice was I was getting more and more depressed. I was getting more and more, pressure to think about looking to get a girlfriend. But I know I did go on one date with a woman. It was 18, the magic age when you can go on a date 1-to-1 in the church. We went to this restaurant, and in the middle of the meal, I looked at her and food. In one way, we want so different things. In another way, we're looking for exactly the same thing. We're looking for a big man to look after us. This is not fair on you or me. And I decided at that time that I would never date again.
That's actually really profound, Nigel. We want the same thing. But it's sort of not possible. That's really profound. Keep sharing.
Yeah, I went to the bishop event uh, when I was 26 and said, I want to be open about my homosexual, my gayness. And he went, you know, Nigel, if you say I am gay, that is enough to be excommunicated, what it was in the 80s. And I looked at him and I went, right. But I'm starting to do self harm. My, I'm not eating. He said, Nigel, try fasting. My mum said on the third day of the fast, and I mean a strict Mormon fast, no food, no water for 3 days. You're gonna eat, or you're going to hospital. I'm not having you do this anymore. I don't care what the church says. It isn't good for you to not eat for more than 2 days. No, if it is 3 days, mum, but I didn't say that. And she went, you could eat now. I cooked your favorite meal, and you're not going to get off the table until you eat at least a half of it. And I knew I actually walked in front of a car to get knocked over. The um, the driver of the car, of course, I didn't know at the time, was the second councillor in the present in the bishopric. I then went to the bishop and went, I need help. Can you give me some counselling? And he said, I won't give you any counselling. He said, if you're sexually active. So I came up with a plan. I knew one of the local toilets was being policed by the police. And so I went in there when the police was in there and thinking, it was about an hour I was in there trying to get them to arrest me. So I could go back to the bishop and say, look, I got record, I now got a record for assisting in a toilet. And so I ended up in a police station. And what you don't know is the first councillor on the state presidency was the chief police on the right. So he was upstairs, I was downstairs, thinking, what am I doing? Why am I here? Why am I getting myself in such a mess? And I realized that I had two choices. Either I was eventually going to kill myself or to leave the church. So I left the church. I was offered a place in a squat in London. And being a completely country block, country person, moving into a big city with lots of needles and lots of everything was very scary. It was very exciting too, but very scary. And I went to my stake president in London and went, I want to be excommunicated. He said, why? I'm having sex every other night with a different man. I'm drinking. I'm smoking things. I'm not living to the standard of the church. And I don't want people to think the church allows any of those things. He went, you're not active. I went, so? He said, I'm not going to excommunicate you. This is in the 80s, so it was easier to get excommunicated as a gay man in the 80s than it is now. And I eventually wrote a letter to my bishop asking for my name to be removed, and it was. And the burden of my church was great. About this time, my legs started to not work as well as they have been, and I was falling down, and I was being stopped in the police or in the state. I was being stopped in the street, walking down the street by the police for being drunk when I haven't drunk anything. So I went to the doctor and said, what's it happening? Is my disability getting any worse? And he went, no, it's old age. And I went, I'm 28. They said, it's still old age. And I started to use the wheelchair. I was given a second-hand wheelchair by a friend of mine who couldn't use the wheelchair anymore because of her disability. She had muscular dystrophy, which meant her disability was getting too bad to use a manual wheelchair. So I had our old wheelchair. Eventually got one of my own, and got got more expensive chairs. So that is how I became a wheelchair user. And I was, I think, at, for, at just under 40, I went for HIV test and it came back positive. And me being a big crybaby as I am, I just sat when I was told that and cried solidly for half an hour. The friend who was with me at the time was going, it's going to be all right. It's just Nigel being Nigel. He is very emotional. And I'm whispering all night. So he came home, left for work the next day. He did. And I was okay. I wasn't, but I started to cope. And it was just about the time that Messism was getting manageable. The Messism wasn't killing people because in the early days of HIV, there was just as many people who died of the Messism as they died of the illness. And in the mid 80s, I could have gone to a funeral of a person in their 20s every week of somebody I knew. So that was a really dark period in my life. I didn't do anything with that knowledge for a year. Then I went back to church as a non member and said, what did I do to be rebaptized? And he said, show us that you are worthy. So I did. And they said, right, now you need to uh, have the mission interviews again. But the missionaries gone uh, different to you. I went, right. So who could teach me? And he said, there are several return missionaries in the world. Ask one of them. So it became my responsibility to find somebody to teach me. I was starting to have a friendship with a young just returned missionary. And I asked him if he would teach me. And he went, yes. And unlike my all the white ward, my ward in London knew I was gay. It was quite common knowledge that I was gay. And I went, the first thing is we can't be alone. He went, why? I'm gay. He went, right. So you want me to find somebody to sit in the lessons with us? I went, yes. He said, I can kill two stones with one stone here. He said, I will get one of the sisters to sit in. So I can have some more personal time with her before and afterwards. And we got to teach you. After 2 years of that happening, he suddenly went, Nigel, this is stupid. You know there's nothing going to happen, and I know that nothing is going to happen. I don't care what the world thinks about me. So I want some alone time with you because I want to get to know you as a person instead of in a season where you are putting on more of an act because of your disabilities. We're fine. So we became friends. I found out after I was baptized that if you are um, if you have your name removed from the records or are excommunicated, you're meant to have an interview from at least the, the um the local 70, I believe. And I didn't. So Salt Lake didn't know I was rebaptized. And for coming on to 2 years after I was rebaptized, I had two record numbers. What we found out because sort of like I managed to get into the temple and everything. I got my diamond in this period. So that's how much I was in the church. I had my diamond. I was going twice a month, once with the Lord and once with a friend who was a temple worker. At the time, his wife was pregnant, so she couldn't go to the temple. And I was so um, I went and started to do the genealogy work through a church when broken. And my bishop got a letter, a phone call from the local 70s from Salt Lake saying this member is not a member of the church. Can you have an interview with him? So I went in, and like always, as after I joined the church, I always took somebody else in with me when I have an interview with one of the church leaders. I was told originally, Nigel, you know, interviews are can't figure the word. Uh, Nobody needs to know what happened in the interview. And I said, we are talking about me. We are not talking about personal things about you. So I have the right to let people who I trust know what I'm talking about. And I would rather have an slightly independent person there. So if anything goes wrong either way, I I got a, I and you got a witness to it. And I was given what I later found out was the temple, virtually the temple interview to check up I was worthy enough to be a member. This um, kept going, and I then a month afterwards, I started to get a problem with masturbation again. So I went to the bishop and said, all right, we're not going to do anything serious about it, but we are going to tell you can't use your priesthood and you um, can't take the sacrament. I went, fine. What about my home teaching? So you can't do that. And I can't tell my companion why. No. So that I got home, rang up my companion and went, hi, got some bad news. Can't go home teaching. Bishop told me. And he says, why? I said, I can't tell you. And I then had I stopped masturbating. I went for a wilderness camp interview with the state president. And the state president asked me one question at the beginning. Do you call yourself gay? I went, yes. I said, hmm, interventable. You can't have your temple recommends. And I went, but I love the temple. He said, until you stop calling yourself gay, you can't have a temple recommend. I said, if I don't call myself gay, I can't say I'm being honest with my fellow man. And if I'm not being honest with my fellow man, I can't have a temple recommend. So I'm in church, what is it, 18, I think it is, where I'm damned if I do and I'm damned if I don't. I carried on going to church. Members were refusing to take the sacrament when I was passing it. You know, openly would not touch the tray. I don't think it was common knowledge that I was HIV positive, but there was always that fear. There was always the fear that they was going to catch the gay of me too. And I was going downhill very fast. My friends got married and left the world. He actually moved to America for 3 years. He worked in the British Embassy for a little while. He left the church, his wife left the church. I was still going on and off. Never tried to get my taper recommend back. I then the thing about um not baptizing gay member, not baptizing children of gay members came in, which really upset me. Like everybody, I think it upset every gay member, LGBT member in the church. Then I was really struggling to be good, to be um, non-sexual, and at the time, when I came back, I realized that every time I was shaking hands with somebody, I was getting sick because I was on the borderline between AIDS and HIV. I never got AIDS, but I was on the borderline. So I've stopped shaking hands. I just still don't shake hands even to today. It scares me to death, the shaking of hands means. Then, then corporate striked. And I went to the bishop and went, I'm living by myself. I'm disabled and I want some help. Can you help me with getting shopping in, please? I'm not meant to leave the house. And I call on any service that will give me enough food for a week. And he went, sorry, Nigel, we're too busy dealing with real disabled people. And I went, what? We're too busy dealing with single sisters and brethren with real disabilities. And I went, I won't say what I thought. I, as one of my friends' mother would tell you, she wants to tell you to get lost, but using the three F's. And after COVID went back, and none of the members, they put me in behind the back wall, wouldn't let me sit with the members, and none of the members talked to me. And after a month of that, I thought, they don't want me. I don't want to be here. What about not going anymore? So I stopped going. Yeah. Even if Shannon not talking to members is not an official thing in the church, it does happen. And I don't think I'm the only member who has faced the award turning against him or her or they because of the way their life have gone who they are. So that's basically bringing us back to where we are now.
Nigel, if I could give you a big hug, I would. It takes a lot of courage to share a story, and you did it in 45 minutes. You got through 62 years, and you could have spent 2 hours probably on many segments of your life.
Yes, but I knew we didn't have that much time. It's not moment stories.
Your listeners, had a really strong impression of Nigel on the podcast, and you'll have to decide what parts of his story are helpful for you. I just felt impressed. Nigel's story needs to be recorded. I don't, you may live to be 90. You were in the hospital yesterday. You may be in the last year of your life. I don't know. None of us know. But the other thing I thought is, Nigel, I think you've done the very best you can with your life, dealing with being gay, with disabilities in your late 20s, and all the complexities that come with that. The church, it sometimes worked for you, at other times it didn't. You had some really good church experience, some really painful ones. I loved your love of the temple and also your desire to be honest that you're gay and the integrity that, there. I love you being aware of being HIV positive, and being nervous about shaking people's hands because not knowing what that meant for them. I just sense, Nigel.
It's what it would make for me. I know I could have passed on by shaking hands, but whatever they got, I can get.
Yeah, and so you don't want to get sick. That's a good point. I understand now even better because we know that AIDS isn't spread by shaking of hands or HIV. But, Nigel, I'm just really moved. Listeners, I realize if Nigel were 20 right now, he'd have a much better experience in the church. You can identify as gay. You can have a temple recommend. We wouldn't ask you to not be gay. We wouldn't say, go pray, go fast, go serve. And so part of this story is just recognizing our past, that it sometimes was really painful. And when we know better, we do better. But I think to heal and to move forward, we have to acknowledge our past and reconcile with it and recognize that it brought pain and harm at times to people like Nigel. And I think validating Nigel's pain and his difficult road to me is part of my baptism covenants. It doesn't mean I don't support the church and our leaders. I feel I can do both and to sit with Nigel and hear a little bit about his story. But I think about how Jesus would treat Nigel, and I think about all the parables in the New Testament about Jesus being kind and loving and supportive. And every one of those parables, there's principles there that want me to just be kind to Nigel and support Nigel and love Nigel and recognize the complications of his life. Nigel, I'm impressed you're alive. That's maybe part of the story that's helpful for listeners who are wondering if they're suicidal and they're better off being dead, but you are alive. And I think my life is better because you're alive, because I've had some wonderful exchanges with you, met you, but your story, I think, gives people hope for their future and that they can get through really tough times. So I think that's a really powerful part of your story is you're alive. And yeah, the church doesn't work for you right now, but I think you mentioned you have friend groups and you have peace. And I think you've done the very best you can.
I would say to any young person on this line who is thinking of suicide, go to whatever service in your area for help. If you are in America, seek out Mother Dragons. They will love you. And if you're in Utah, they most likely will find a way for a woman who is a mother of an LGBT child to come and visit you and defend you, love you, and take you to where you need to be. And suicide is never the answer. It doesn't make things any better for nobody. Richard.
I love that.
Correct.
Thank you, Nigel. Anything else you'd like to share with our listeners, Nigel?
About 2 years ago, I went to my stake president and had an interview with him and said, what would happen if I started a date and it wasn't, and as somebody who is asexual, there won't be any sex. He said, A, there's no such thing as asexual. And B, everybody in a relationship have sex eventually. So there would be a church, you will have a church court if I found out. That was 2 years ago. So I think it depends who your church leaders are, how you're going to be treated. Have you got any questions, Richard?
No, I admire you continuing to engage in your church leaders and recognizing that it's every church leader may answer things a little bit differently. And but I have to, my impression is to recognize, to just love you, Nigel. And over again, you've turned to church leaders for guidance and you've tried to do the right thing and you recognize at times that you haven't done the right thing. But I think you've just done the best you can. I recognize our church was in a different place in the 80s. I understand, as Nigel has shared, that if you identified as gay in the 70s or 80s, that just puts you sideways with church teachings. The church hadn't separated orientation from behavior. And so I think part of Nigel's story is recognizing the past and the difficult road that Nigel and other gay Latter-day Saints have walked that are older. Doesn't make it easier for the young ones, but you older ones, I don't want to say you exist just to help the younger ones, but you've helped our church, our society, as you've shared your stories and caused people hearts to change. I know when I was a YSA bishop, listening to gay men significantly changed me because I listened to their stories and I realized they didn't choose this and they can't unchoose this. So it's my job to support. So I don't fault you for not being active in the church right now, Nigel. I just think you are doing the very best you can. I love that you were bringing back memories, Nigel, because when I served in England and from 1980 to 1982, there were times when my companion was a local Britishman. It was maybe for just a few days between transfers, and they were terrific. I thought of the sacrifice they made and their love of the missionary work and to bring people into Christ. And I recognize you are one of those and did a lot of serving along the way. And I love your comments to people that are feeling suicidal, that it's never the answer. Nigel, I think God loves you. And I think this is not, it's just my feeling, listeners, that when Nigel meets his Heavenly Father, he will give him a big hug and just say you've done the best you can and welcome home. And I'm proud of you. And the Savior will be there to continue to walk with you. And I recognize our church hasn't always supported you and society hasn't always supported you and maybe friends and family. And I just think you've done the best you can. And hopefully we can act on impressions in our circle of influence to better support the Nigel Bowles in our life and to be prepared for those conversations when someone like Nigel opens up and has the courage to talk about his life. So those are some of my thoughts, Nigel, but I want to give you the last word. Anything else you'd like to share with our listeners?
Even when it's really dark, the only person who can get you through to tomorrow is yourself. Learn to love yourself. Learn to believe in yourself. I still struggle with that. I'm not saying it's easy, but it means if everybody, like 2 times, what I didn't say on all the right, when it became common knowledge, the whole world didn't talk to me. I became from the golden boy where if missionaries needed somebody to teach, they came to me. If anybody needed a home teaching companion, they came to me to be the person who nobody talked to overnight. And it can happen even today, that you would lose all of your friends. So you need to believe in yourself and you need to start anew. And it's not easy, but it's possible.
Thank you, Nigel. You have wonderful wisdom in your 6 decades on the earth. And listeners, I love Nigel's closing comment. Love yourself and believe in yourself. And that is not influenced then by other people. And that is a really good way forward, is to love yourself and believe yourself. So my friend Nigel Bull from the UK, I'm so glad to have had you on the podcast. I love you, brother. I believe in you. And I think your words help others, especially perhaps those in a really dark spot. You have a very thoughtful, steady voice. So this is Nigel Bull and Richard Ostler signing off from another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love.